The chandelier flickered and the guests froze. A woman's voice, trembling yet clear. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk." Silence. The camera pans to a man in a janitor's uniform, his eyes a storm of pain and fury. How did it come to this? Her name was Claire Matthews, a CEO the board celebrated for her brilliance, confidence, and unshakable control. Each morning she arrived at the glass-paneled towers of Matthews Global, stepped out of her black sedan, the perfume of her suit jacket a faint memory in the lobby. She was 29 when she took the helm, ambitious, precise, admired. Yet tonight she lay on a cold marble floor in front of everyone she ever trusted. Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It began 6 months earlier. On a Wednesday evening, Claire crossed paths with David Hill, the night shift janitor. He was quiet, kept to himself, mopped the same hallway every night at exactly 9:15 p.m., his headphones in, the faint hum of the HVAC system overhead. She never saw him, or if she did, she didn't look. Until one evening, the smell of stale coffee lingered from the staff lounge, the fluorescents flickered overhead, and she paused. He stood there, mopping, shoulders slumped. She asked, "You okay?" He nodded without stopping, and she moved on. The next morning a memo went out. "Don't approach night staff unless instructed." Claire's assistant read it and frowned. Claire's jaw clenched. She dismissed it. She was too busy to bother with the janitor. She had quarterly reports, investor lunches, a reputation to maintain. David kept mopping. At home, he lived in a small unit 1 stop away on the subway, his fingers calloused, his hopes buried. 3 months later, Claire invited investors to a gala. The chandelier gleamed, the guests mingled, glasses clinked. She delivered a flawless speech. Midway, laughter broke out in the crowd. She looked at David, standing off to the side, a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Rage? She didn't know. After the event, she locked herself in her office. The faint sound of water being swept downstairs echoed. She stared at the reflection of the city lights on her window and felt, for the first time, a pang of emptiness. Then the turning point. One early morning, she found a note taped to her windshield. "You stepped on me when I was down." Her breath caught. She didn't know who wrote it, but inside she felt a chill. She shrugged it off, until that day on the marble floor. She tripped. A guest yelled. David appeared. He lifted her up, his voice low. "I warned you." And the room went silent. Now she lies there. She cannot walk. Her empire stares at her. The man she ignored, the man she dismissed, the man she never saw, now holds the truth, and she realizes the cost of treating people as invisible. What would you do if it happened to you? If you were Claire, would you have asked him how he was? If you were David, how long would you wait before speaking up? The question is, who is invisible in your life right now? Who is quietly watching while you live in the spotlight? In the aftermath, Claire steps down, 6 months later, to volunteer at a shelter. David accepts a promotion, his eyes calmer. They never speak again, but the memory remains. The message lingers. Power is not the absence of humility, and control can collapse the moment you forget you are human. Thank you for staying with us. Let us know in the comments how this story made you feel. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to hit subscribe so we can bring you more stories that make you think, feel, and reflect. Victoria Lane, 42 years old, elegant, commanding, the face of Lane Industries, a name whispered in boardrooms and flashed across magazine covers. To the public, she was perfection sculpted into human form, the self-made woman who built an empire from nothing. They saw the awards, the charity galas, the designer gowns, and the poised smile that never seemed to crack. She funded children's hospitals, donated to disaster relief, and spoke about giving back in carefully rehearsed interviews. But behind the gold-plated reputation lay a truth she could barely face. Every night when the lights of her penthouse dimmed and the sound of the city softened into a low hum, she felt the silence crawl in. No laughter, no warmth, just echoes of choices that could never be undone. She told herself it was the price of success, but deep down she knew it was something else. Guilt. She arrived at work each morning surrounded by people who adored her power but knew nothing of her pain. Her assistant, her board, her staff, they followed her orders with practiced smiles, careful never to look too long into her eyes. All except one, Elias Cooper, the janitor, 55, quiet, polite, always there before dawn and after dark, the kind of man no one ever noticed, yet somehow he saw everything. His slow steps echoed through the hallways of Lane Tower like a rhythm that marked the passing of her days. He would nod when she passed by, a silent acknowledgement that seemed too knowing, too calm. It unsettled her. She once caught her reflection in the glass of her office door and saw him in the background, mopping the marble floor. Their eyes met for only a second, but she remembered it vividly. There was something in his eyes that day, not fear, not admiration, recognition. Recognition of what, she couldn't say. Maybe of someone who'd also carried something heavy and unseen. She tried to shake it off, but the thought lingered. The next morning, when she walked in and saw him cleaning a spill near the elevator, she hesitated. Her heels clicked against the tile as she passed, but for the first time she found herself wanting to speak, to say something, anything, but nothing came out. The elevator doors closed before she could, and that silence would come to haunt her. That afternoon, Victoria's phone buzzed endlessly. Investors, partners, journalists. Everyone wanted her attention, her approval, her voice. But as the day dragged on, she couldn't stop thinking about that fleeting look. She didn't know that Elias, too, carried a story, one that was quietly intertwined with hers in ways she could never imagine. And soon, the walls she built to keep her world perfect would begin to crack, one quiet moment at a time. Tell me, if you were in Victoria's shoes, admired, wealthy, surrounded by people who respected you but never really knew you, would you feel fulfilled? Or would you, too, wonder if the life everyone envied was only a cage lined with gold? She built an empire. He swept its floors, and neither knew that fate was already circling back. Years before the chandeliers, before the power suits and magazine covers, Victoria Lane was just a name on an ambitious young woman's resume. A dreamer willing to do anything to climb higher. She was brilliant, strategic, and fearless, but also relentless. When she rose through the ranks of Lane Industries, she didn't just compete. She conquered. To her, business wasn't personal, it was survival. Every deal was a test, every rival a threat. She learned early that compassion slowed you down. So when the economy faltered and the company faced crisis, she made decisions that would define her legacy and quietly destroy others. Hundreds of layoffs, entire departments shut down, lives rearranged in the name of efficiency. She told herself it was necessary for the greater good. But those layoffs had faces, families, and stories. Among them was a man named Elias Cooper. Back then, he wasn't a janitor. He worked in the manufacturing wing, hands worn from years of welding steel parts, his pride anchored in the job that fed his family. His wife, Marlene, handled the accounting. His son, Jamie, only 19, had just started in the factory, following his father's footsteps. They believed in the company. They believed in her. Until the day everything changed. It happened during a late shift, a mechanical fault that could have been prevented, a machine jammed, gears grinding, sparks flying. Jamie was there, and in a single terrible moment, his hand was caught in the press. The sound was unforgettable, a metallic scream, a father's shout, a son's cry. Elias rushed to him, blood soaking his shirt. The doctors said he'd live, but his hand would never heal right. He couldn't work again. They filed for compensation, desperate for help. But weeks later, a letter arrived from Lane Industries board, bearing Victoria's digital signature. We regret to inform you that your claim cannot be processed under current company policy. That single line shattered everything Elias had built. His savings vanished, his home was foreclosed, and his wife's health began to fade under the weight of stress and regret. When Marlene passed away 2 years later, Elias stood by her grave, clutching the old company badge she'd kept in her purse. He never blamed a machine. He blamed the people who let it happen, the ones who hid behind polished smiles and press statements. Years passed. Time changed faces, dulled pain into silence. But fate, as it often does, has a way of circling back. When the janitorial contractor offered a position at Lane Industries headquarters, Elias took it, quietly, deliberately. He said nothing of who he once was. He put on the uniform, carried his mop and bucket, and walked the same hallways where executives toasted promotions and spoke her name with reverence. Every sweep of his broom was a reminder of what was taken. Then one evening, long after most had gone home, Victoria returned to her office to find a single envelope resting on her desk. No return address, no seal. Just her name, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Inside was a short note on lined paper. You don't remember me, but I remember everything you took. She froze. The handwriting trembled, but the message was clear, and it cut through every layer of control she'd built. Her breath caught. The room felt colder. For the first time in years, Victoria Lane, the woman who feared nothing, felt something she couldn't define: guilt, dread, or recognition. But what she didn't know was that the man who swept her floors each night had already been waiting for this moment. And that letter, that simple, shaking message, was only the beginning of everything that was about to unravel. Tell me, if you were Victoria, how would you react? Would you ignore the letter, pretending it was nothing? Or would you feel the chill of the past finally catching up? The letter sat on her desk like a stain she couldn't wash away. The handwriting shaky, the ink slightly smudged, as if written by trembling hands. You don't remember me, but I remember everything you did. Those 12 words repeated in her mind like a whisper she couldn't silence. At first she dismissed it as a prank, some bitter ex-employee or competitor trying to rattle her. But the tone of it, the raw pain behind those words, it felt personal, too personal. She handed it to her head of security, insisting on discretion. Cameras were checked, mail logs reviewed, staff questioned. But nothing. No fingerprints, no evidence, not even a trace on the delivery feed. Whoever left it knew the building inside out. For the first time, Victoria's fortress of control began to crack. Days turned into nights that felt longer, colder. Her sleep was broken by flashes of faces she barely remembered. People she'd laid off, partners she'd outmaneuvered, employees she'd disappointed. And through it all, that same line echoed, "You don't remember me." She began noticing things that shouldn't have been there. A folder moved slightly on her desk, the faint scent of industrial cleaner lingering in her office, stronger than usual. Footsteps in the hall after midnight. She'd tell herself it was nothing, but her pulse would betray her. Sometimes she'd walk into the executive restroom and swear she heard a whisper when no one was there. Other times she'd catch her reflection in the mirror and think she saw a figure pass behind her. But when she turned, the corridor was empty. The shadows didn't follow her. They waited. Quietly. Patiently. Her assistant noticed the change. The usual commanding tone in Victoria's voice now carried an edge of fragility. She'd pause mid-sentence, glance at the door, or lose her train of thought during meetings. One morning a second note appeared, slipped under her office door. "You built your world on other people's pain." No signature, just that sentence, the same trembling penmanship. She called security again, They searched every inch of her floor. Nothing. Cameras caught no one entering. To everyone else, Victoria looked paranoid, overworked, maybe even unwell. But she knew better. This wasn't madness. It was consequence. As the week went on, the whispers turned inward. In the quiet of her office, she'd replay moments she had long buried. A meeting where she'd signed off a round of layoffs without reading the full list, the night her assistant begged her to reconsider a plant closure, the face of a young man standing outside the gates the day it happened, shouting for justice while she looked away. The letter hadn't brought a threat. It had brought a mirror. She tried to distract herself with work, more meetings, more travel, more appearances, but even under the soft stage lights and polite applause, the words haunted her. You took everything from me. What did she do to deserve this? Who was sending these notes? Was it revenge? Or was it a plea for her to finally see what she had become? The irony was brutal. Victoria had spent her life mastering control, controlling outcomes, controlling people, controlling her image. But now she couldn't even control her own thoughts. Every reflection, every silence seemed to speak to her, and in that silence she began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: remorse. Late one evening she sat alone in her office, staring at the 2 notes laid out before her like evidence. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters with her fingertips. There was a weight behind the words, the kind that only grief could carve. And for a brief moment her heart softened, not in fear, but in recognition. Because deep down, beneath the layers of success and pride, she began to suspect something terrible. What if the person who wrote those letters wasn't trying to destroy her? What if they were trying to make her remember? The walls of Lane Industries had always felt like a kingdom. Tall glass, sharp lines, every inch reflecting Victoria's image back at her. But now, even her own reflection refused to look her in the eye. The boardroom, once her stage, had turned into a courtroom. The same men and women who'd applauded her ambition were now whispering behind closed doors. Profits were slipping, investors were restless, and rumors spread faster than the truth. In one tense meeting, her lead director cleared his throat and said the words she'd spent her life running from. "Maybe it's time you step aside, Victoria." She didn't argue. She simply nodded, her face composed but her heart pounding like a drum inside a hollow chest. The moment she left that room, she knew. The empire she'd built was no longer hers. And yet when she stepped into the hallway, no one looked up. The assistants kept typing, the interns kept walking. To them, she was still the same untouchable figure, but inside, something had broken. The letters hadn't stopped. They came less often now, but always when she least expected them. A short phrase here, a reminder there. You took everything. I see you now. They haunted her in silence. So she withdrew, stopped taking calls, canceled meetings, stayed late long after everyone left. The corridors became her companions, the faint hum of the lights her lullaby. And then there was Elias, always there, polite, quiet, steady, sweeping floors, wiping tables, fixing what others ignored. The world barely noticed him, but she did. At first out of discomfort, then curiosity, then, strangely, trust. He was the only one who treated her like a person, not a title, not a mistake. He didn't ask for anything, didn't flatter or fear her. When she spoke, he listened. When she fell silent, he didn't fill the air with empty words. In a life filled with noise, Elias was calm, grounding. One night, long after midnight, Victoria sat in her office staring at the city lights, her hands trembling over a resignation letter she couldn't bring herself to sign. Elias appeared at the doorway, holding a trash bag, his voice quiet. "You should get some rest, ma'am." She didn't look up. Instead, she whispered, her voice cracking, "You don't understand what it's like. To be trapped inside your own body. To feel it closing in on you while everyone thinks you're fine." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, softly, he replied, "You'd be surprised what people survive." The words hit her harder than she expected. There was something in his tone, not pity, not judgment, but experience, as if he wasn't speaking in sympathy, but from memory. She looked up at him then, really looked, for the first time. The lines on his face, the tired eyes, the hands that bore the scars of labor. She realized she had no idea who this man truly was. After that night, their unspoken bond deepened. She'd find small comfort in his presence. A brief conversation by the elevator, a nod in the hallway, the faint sound of his broom in the silence of her thoughts. He became the only constant in a world that was slipping away. But the cruelest part of fate is how it lets trust blossom in the very soil of consequence. Because while she found peace in his quiet company, Elias found something else. Closure, maybe, or the slow, inevitable reckoning that time had promised him years ago. Still, he said nothing. He waited, observed, and she, unknowingly, began to lean on the very man whose life she had shattered without ever knowing his name. The facade of power had cracked, and through it, the truth was slowly seeping in.